deal with, like, since you are a public figure, you know, and I know you don't give a shit about being a celebrity, but you are a public figure.
Right.
And so some of the things that go with being a public figure, people know your salary. So people always like, oh man, you don't have to work another day in your life, or people might assume
Well, I think
even the
people
Full House
assume they
money.
know my salary, but anyone who's worked for Netflix is probably like, yeah, it's not what you like, look, this is not the days of ABC television, you know, everybody's making $1 million on Friends. It's weird, you know, people assume that I live in Beverly Hills in some gated house, and where I'm like, I rent my house, I have a normal life, my kids go to, you know, regular school, like, I don't live some lavish lifestyle, you know, I haven't been working a ton because of the pandemic, so I'm like, look, we're using some coupons, and we're, you know what I mean, like, I mean, maybe not, I'm not coupon clipping, but like, but I definitely am like, can I get 25% off of something if I buy it, you know?
Sure.
I live a really normal life.
But here's the thing is, do you ever feel the pressure because, like, people, let's just say you're a waitress, they're working, they're on your table, because who you are, you have to give more than 20% as a tip, you know, because you feel like,
I mean, I think people always assume that. I mean, look, but in between working as an actress, you know, I worked in the field of drug and alcohol treatment for about 6 years.
Which I commend you for doing that, because you've been very public about that. You wrote about that in your book.
Yeah.
And props to you for being so open and honest about that. I think it was very refreshing and very cool.
Thank you. And you know, if I weren't in acting, I probably would have continued on in my schooling there and become a therapist, or, you know, continued working as a director of operations for different facilities. And, you know, I started working as a tech at a place, taking out the trash and washing the dishes for clients. And, you know, when clients would figure out who I was, they were like, why are you here? And I was like, why wouldn't I be? It's just a job. So I have to have a job, right? I have to have something that I want to do. And I worked my way up in that because I loved it. And I don't have any expectation or ego about having to put in work or going back and having a quote unquote normal job. You know, we all got to pay our bills at some point. So, you know, it is what it is. But I do think people, I mean, I know even in my comments, you know, when I talk about, you know, different political stuff or raising awareness for this, people are like, well, why don't you just, you know, buy this, or why don't you just invest? And I'm like, if I could, I would. But I don't have the money. I wish I lived the life that you think I do. You know, I live a really relatively normal life.
Are the checks from the residuals from the first season of Full House, are they still good?
It depends. You know, here's the thing about residuals is that they renew a contract. So like the first time they renew the contract, you're like, oh, cool, I get paid more per episode. But then as it runs, which Full House has run forever, as it runs, with each showing, the, you know, thing goes down. So, you know, look, I couldn't live on my residuals. People are like, oh, you must be making millions. You're like, I couldn't live on it. I could have a studio apartment. Yeah. Maybe not even in LA. You know, it's not the money that people make in this business. And I remember when TLC and when they all went like bankrupt and were talking about it. People were like, oh, you make all this money. And you're like, I take home maybe 30% of what I get paid. Taxes, managers, attorneys, agents, publicists. Everybody gets some of it. Rightly so, because they work their ass off for me. But I'm not reaping in all of that money at the end of the day. You get a small percent. And let me tell you, you know, being in that tax bracket, you're like, okay, that's just going to go to the government, you know? And
yeah.
So interesting. I think it's fascinating. My experience
with finances is way more normal than people think. I have worked and been like, I don't know how I'm going to make rent this month. And that was not long before I was doing Fuller House. You know, I lived in a 1.5 bedroom apartment with my 2 daughters. They shared a little like half office area. You know, I understand what it's like to be like, I don't know how I have to go to Target and put things back. I've done that in my adult life in the last 10 years. I understand what living a normal life is like. And I'm actually really grateful for that, because I don't have this weird reality that I'm out of touch with. I'm like, oh no, I get this shit. Like I get having to make ends meet and freaking out that you can't, and being a single mom and having 2 kids and being like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, how do I do this? You know? So, and I don't say that for people to be like, oh, poor, not like that. But I say it because I want people to understand, like, my life hasn't always been getting everything I want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's funny because I think
that's why you're so relatable. Sorry.
I had 2 kids from my high school hit me up within the last 36 hours looking for money. I'm like, guys, I do a podcast. Okay. Everyone has a podcast.
Like, you have a podcast. I'm like, you have a podcast, have you? If you think that I'm making, I'm like, you think I'm making all this money off, I'm not Joe Rogan. Let's put it that way. It's a passion project. I love to do it and it's fun, but I'm not in it for the money.
That's great.